Hi, my name is Benedict. This is part 2 of a series on writing a song. Part 1, we set up the very basics, which is our chord progression and some rhythmic elements along with a bass and some simple drumming. That gave us what I called our verse. Now, as I said, you could have at that point merely copied that out X number of times to suit the number of verses that you've got, or the number of parts that you've got to your vocal, sung them, put it together, and called it done. It would be simple, but it would be done, and it would be yours. This time we're going to, I'm not sure 100% how far we're going to go to this time, but this time we're going to expand on what we've got. We're going to need some alternate parts, and we might as well start with the chorus. So we finished with this. Now, as I said, we need to move forward, so we'll hear the transition as we go into chorus. Okay. Oh, in case you've missed the first part or you didn't pay attention at that point, this is all meant to be fairly simple stuff. So anybody with more experience in songwriting or harmony or anything like that is going to go, "Ooh, geez, that's really basic." Of course it's very basic. I'm deliberately trying not to go too much further than you might find yourself going yourself. So what you hopefully noticed here was that obviously there's the addition of some more instruments. We have a string line that rises through here, and then we've got a brass section. But what you may not have consciously noticed, but hopefully noticed at the same time, is that our chord progression changes a little. So if we listen to just our chords, let's see from here. Boom, boom. Boom, boom. We want to make it clear that this section lifts some. Now we can do lifting just with volume, but volume is a tricky one. If you can do it with notes, you're going to have a more powerful effect, especially if you then do volume lifts or things like that, which you don't have to do. But with a way that lifts the feel from notes, because that's where you have more impact with, so if we look at our two, which is this and this, we see that while on the surface they're broadly similar, still collections of this kind of stuff, this rises more. It even rises more overall, but we still come to the same outcome. See, same outcome. We've still got that same cadence because that says finished. Again, if you know your theory better, there are lots of other cadences, there's lots of other things you can do, but anytime you use the, you know you're winning, you know you're safe. So the reason we do this is if, while it's tempting to use exactly the same pattern that we had before, our chorus won't in any way seem different. It's not at all uncommon to have a slightly different chord progression in our chorus. Just try not to have a radically different chord progression. So if we're doing a 1, 2, 3 through our verse in terms of chords, a 1, 3, 4 is not too different. But if we're doing 1, 2, 3, and then we do it's quite different. So you've got to work out how to make it make sense. If you don't understand your chords, again, it's still not tricky. Just be open-minded. Once you've got your basic chord structure, you can see that the first chord's the same. The second chord here roots itself in a B, and a B on the top, and an F. So it's actually it's a bit of a funny one because it's actually relying on or using our cadence. Here I've taken a couple of those notes and moved them. Because I want it to go up, then I probably want my top note to be higher than the note before. Because we will tend to hear our top notes in a chord. So we started with that. But we hear the top note movement more than the ones underneath. The ones underneath give us richness and texture, but that's what we hear. So by rising, that's saying, oh, rather than going down before, we're going up now. And a lot of times where I had the low notes here, I started by simply transposing them up. So move them up an octave and then rearrange the rest of the chord to make it work. To start with, I had that note there. So it was a, which is, well, seeing this as playing in D, but I am hitting C major notes, that's just a first chord inverted. It's an inversion thereof because same notes, I've just moved the root to above. But then as I was working on a later part, the melody didn't fit as well there, so I moved the note to make it fit. That's what you do. Nobody hears the difference because remember they hear the top note more than the middle note. So it went through, basically made those changes throughout. So it's very similar. But different. And that way we can then say, okay, I've got my chorus bit. What came next was drums. Largely the drums are the same. I just added a little bit of more stuff. So where we didn't have, like where we're using a hi-hat before for our kind of snare space, as is common in soft rock or jazz or something, you don't need to use your snare a lot. You can use a side stick or even a hi-hat just to keep your timing. There I've used a side stick and then into a snare. So you hear, if we just solo this, I should give us the piano. Here, how we've increased the number of hits. What's happening here? I've moved some of the rolls a little bit, but not a lot. More towards the end of it. I've got one hi-hat there and one hi-hat here. This kit comes with two different hi-hats. So I've used them in different places to create change, even though most people won't notice the difference. And then by using the snare, we're bringing in a much brighter sound, and that's in the second half, where you'll also notice we brought in the brass. The bass, I'll unmute that, so note where initially our bass was fairly busy. Now we know the rest of the chorus is going to become busier, so while we want to give the impression of more happening, we have to be careful of making everything busier at once. Because if we make everything busier at once, we may end up with what we used to call MIDI soup. In other words, just too many notes at once, doing too much complex stuff just because we thought we could get away with it. So let me move that. I just realized it's under my head. So kind of similar, but it's much simpler. So if we bring in our chords, it's very much sticking to the root note of each of these. So our chords up here, it's largely just playing those. A little bit of change, a little bit more emphasis on playing the same note, on repetition of notes. So that actually creates a more solid driving feel. The first bass line is kind of playing all over the place. So where there's complexity before in the bass line, in some ways it's the most complex part of that verse, but it's subtle because it's low. But using a stand-up double bass, more complex bass lines flow nicely. It wasn't a plan, I just grabbed, well, this sound seems to work nicely here. I allow things to happen rather than coming in and going. I'll talk about that more later. As our chorus gets more complex, I allow the bass to become simpler so it becomes more driving, which makes it easier to understand, easier to sing. Not that we've got to the singing part yet. It gets a little bit flourishy at the end. Probably not the way it would be played, but this is what I'm doing. I'm not fussing about, is this how a double bass plays? I'm merely going, yep, I can put those notes down easily. This is important. If you spend too much time obsessing about how would a double bass play this, you're going to get yourself stuck. And the last thing that I want you to do is be stuck. The whole idea of this series is to be able to move forward and get a result. Not get the result. Because I've actually finished this song now, and I'm going to say the results are completely different from what I thought I might get entering this. And this is a really big deal, because a mistake a lot of people make when they sit down to write their song is that they don't even necessarily have a song. They don't necessarily even have a lyric. And the lyric is your song. It's not the other way around. It's not some music and then whack some random words on top and it's a song. A real song is written with words and then filled out. That's the official definition of how a song's made. Do it however you want, but that's the official thing. But people sit down and they have this very rigid genre. I'm going to make a metalcore track, blah, blah, and there's so many definitions around genre about it's got to be this, it's got to be, and they box themselves in real tight. Real tight. And this is not how it gets done. When any classic band who's written songs that we're listening to 30, 40 years later, Creedence, the Eagles, Sisters of Mercy, when any of these people write something, they may have a general sense, okay, I'm working in this arena. Because obviously if the Eagles suddenly gave us something that was radically different, suddenly gave us disco, we might be a bit. But nonetheless, they are open. So when you listen to a bunch of Eagles songs, while you hear a very similar thing, which is Eagles, or the same with Creedence, or Sisters, or any band that you can pick, Kiss, Mötley Crüe, don't care who you're picking, there's a sense of what ties them together. But there's also a sense that, hang on, they brought in this element. So in the early 80s, there was a lot of that. Police were writing records that were rock, but were also reggae, and there were also elements of punk and elements of prog, even though we didn't necessarily want to acknowledge that we were prog rock. Be open. Really super important, be open. So that's part of why I've written this with just basic formula sounds. Just loaded a electric piano, a guitar sound. I haven't gone, this has to be the perfect sound. Because the moment you're chasing that, you're cutting out what really might be there. Plus, more importantly, remember, this is about how to get you a result. And getting a result means not allowing yourself to fail. So long as you don't allow yourself to fail, you will get a result. And that's the number one thing. Be open. And that means that rather than coming in and going, I have to write exactly this, which sets you up to fail, because as soon as you've got something that's slightly outside, you go, it's wrong. Oh no, this is like a power metal sound, not a mathcore metal sound. Therefore, I'm failing. That's stupid. That's setting yourself up to fail. That's a really bad plan, because you go, oh no. No good. Set yourself up. This is what you come out with. If it starts to sound like power metal, brilliant, because that's what it wants to be. That's what it needs to be. Remember the song gods? We got to follow them, not the other way around. They are not our little bitches. We follow the song. So, we now have most of our chorus. The next thing that I added was the brass section. The brass section is the whole chord here. So if we open this, see our brass section? So we can see our brass section and our electric piano. Exactly the same thing. I had initially grabbed the whole thing, so it was playing all of this as well, but I wanted my chorus to build. Therefore, the best way was to have the first half doing something, the second half doing something with something more. So our brass. And this is a brass section, which is not the same as a trumpet. A brass section will commonly be playing a chord between the different players. So, you've got a bass saxophonist and a trombone player and a trumpet player. They'll be playing different notes, which is this chord. And together, they create this section. And that's a very, very specific sort of sound. Now, they can be very complex in how it's played, all your rhythms and what have you. But here I wanted it to be simple. Many brass section sounds come with a performance feature. Come on. Yep. Often the mod wheel, sometimes the expression wheel. So you can see me doing that, which is what this is. The funny little wiggly line. That is merely mod wheel. While we could do, it sounds cack, because it's not how it's played. The brass section will. So by understanding that little tiny bit more about the instrument that we're working with, we can make it flow nicer. So this comes in. That gave me a nice big fill inside here, but not a single new note. Not a single new note. Then I added strings. This is one of those all strings going at once kind of patches, often called orchestra. And we want it to rise. So it starts in fairly low. Within the mix, it can almost be a little hard to hear as we start. Because our emphasis shouldn't be on that string. Our emphasis should be on the vocal. Because suddenly it's going, ooh, I love you, baby, ooh, I love you, baby. And that's the hook we really want to be having people key into and sing along. But beneath it, we've got... strings aren't doing as much now. They're just working like this as we've got the brass filling things in. You might be thinking again, oh, well, that's not a very good string line. I don't care. That's not the point. The point is that we need a result, and that's all we need, a result. If we're judging our result too much, we're going to guarantee we don't get a result, and that's exactly the opposite of what this is all about. How we got here is relatively simple again. Oh, look, there's our chords. I've started by taking the lower notes, then just gradually worked my way up, using nothing but chord notes. You see, there's virtually nothing. There's one there, but out of this whole run, there is nothing that is not chord notes. So if we listen to just these two, again, making the most of our final cadence here so that everything feels this section is finished. Yes, there are some slightly odd timings, but on their own they sound strange. And yes, you might go, oh, but they sound like MIDI. Get over yourself. Remember, we're here to get a quick result. The better you get at doing that. I haven't put any effort into making it smooth or perfect or right or anything other than here, we can quickly do this. So that's where we've got to. Now, later I thought, well, okay, if I've gotten this far, I had guitars in before. While we can clearly hear the change, at the same time, and we are building at this point, at the same time we've lost something. So it's probably not wise to have lost something at that point, in which case guitars need to still have a voice. But I don't want them to have a strong voice, because it's actually nice when they're kind of not there. It's just I don't want there to be a hole there at the same time. Either way, we could have actually dropped these, especially by the time we got the voices in, but I didn't have the voices at this time. So as you see, the guitars, they're actually playing the same thing as each other, which minimizes them in terms of standing out in the mix. and they're doing nothing but playing arpeggio chord notes. So they're running up and down with a little bit of variety in how they do that. Set patterns, but vary the patterns. Do, 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 do. And set my patterns. You don't want to set one little tiny pattern that's a bar long and repeat that every single bar, because it gets very unnatural. It might be a thing that's done, but it sounds very unnatural, and it limits you tremendously in how the result's going to sound. So shift them around a little bit as you go through. If you've got a 3 or 4 bar set of variations in your pattern, it's going to sound significantly better than if you've got a 1 bar pattern. So the guitars still have a presence, but they're doing significantly less than they were before, which means that they sort of fall into the background. In terms of a mix, when I get around to doing that, I might move them back. I've already said I might move them back overall, but I'm not worrying about mix, because if I'm worrying about mix, I'm not actually getting a result. Remember, this is to get a result. So now I have a chorus. That's really the 2 main sections that I need. Yes, we can get into screaming guitar solos and what have you, but seeing Slash and Eddie are no longer available, then let's not fuss about it. Let's just say, okay, I'm good to go with a verse and chorus. So I then just got to arrange my piece out. So I've got my verse, I've done it twice, I've just marked my choruses here. I've got my chorus, then I've got another verse, a chorus, a verse, chorus, chorus. We'll go home. We could have just copied them exactly as a block and said, there we go. But we can do better. Seeing we've got MIDI and we've been smart enough not to use loops, because if we'd used loops, we'd have no choice but to just drop them there and go, oh, well, that's it. That's all I've got. But the fact that we've been smart and used MIDI means that we can control things a lot more. So let's have a look. First verse. So this is where the song begins. There's not necessarily any run-in here. We can deal with that later if we feel the need, but I don't see why we need to. Song starts. We could have this as our lead-in. The thing is that we've got 16 seconds of lead-in, which is, for a pop song, perhaps a little much. Normally, a couple of bars is what a pop song will have before somebody starts singing. Your business, but if you ask people to wait too long before stuff starts, they might just wander away. Doesn't mean that it's not done, but you're wanting to maximize the chance of people getting into your song. Your song is strongest around its vocal, so get them into the vocal as quickly as you can. And if that means straight away, get them in straight away. Now you'll notice this is different. This has changed. It's not. We started by building kind of all the things we were going to use. But now I've got different bits. I've dropped out these lines here at the beginning. In the first section, our lead electric guitar is not doing anything at all. That's good. That's providing space so we can build. So he's switched off for the moment. But we've got this. Full points if you know what this is. Don't say an electric guitar, because we all know it ain't that. This is actually from the vocal melody. because we got this far and we didn't have a vocal melody. Now, this again is an aside and a bit of a rant, but this is really important. If you've gotten this far and you don't have a vocal melody, you're going to have some trouble. We mentioned vocal melody last time and how you could just go and kind of, but vocals, good songs are written with a deliberate vocal melody, which is more than... That's poor. There are times where it's clever, but it's poor. And believe me, look on YouTube, you find lots of people notice that this modern idea of a one-note vocal melody does not please them. These are people who are walking away. Now, if they're walking away because songs have nothing but that provides you with an opportunity as an alternative. If you have walked away from McDonald's because their food is rather... What are you looking for? You're looking for nice food. Be that alternative as an independent artist. So build yourself an actual vocal melody. If you're a good singer, like a good singer with lots of experience, you already know what vocal melodies are and how important they are. If not, you just got to write one. Writing a vocal melody. Because this is above our main chords, we can go a little close on harmony. It's not a problem. Especially if it's a different sound and it sounds up high. So if our first chord, which was that's hard, doesn't provide any difficulty at all. And then it's what we're doing is we're moving around what we've got. As you see, it's largely staying with our chord notes. But because we're using another sound that's essentially higher than our other notes, we've got a lot more flexibility. It's hard. Harmonizes very nicely, so we get a lot more flexibility. So playing your guitars up high is one thing, letting them go a little bit lower and then keeping your vocal higher is much easier. So we've now I have no words here. I have not written words. I have not written words for a song, apart from a joke for a video where I used a robot singer. I have not written words for a song for 20 or so years, and I have no interest in doing it. It just switched off a long time ago. But I can still get a sense of, well, what might sound nice. Now, in doing this, I started to realize that where I was going was very different from where I thought I might have been going. But remember, I have deliberately made a point of not coming into this with a genre. I've written, and it's mostly in the can. I'm just waiting for a couple of other people to come back with some guest spots. I've written a record that's a combination of rockabilly, rock and roll, and early goth. Pure electronic, but it's a combination of things which are quite outside of what modern electronic music does. And I came into this thinking, look, I'll probably end up writing something similar to that. But as we see already, I've got quite a different feel. And then as I started to write my vocal line, and I'll show you actually now what I did write it with, I got a very different result. Oh my God. Now, if I'd been rigid about genre and rules and what I can and can't do and what isn't cool, I wouldn't allow this to happen. But it's like, okay, I've used this sound before. I'm sort of thinking, okay, what am I going to put in as a vocal line? And I've used this preset before. So I grabbed it, tried various others around, but they don't have the same feel. I like this preset. It's quite emotive, despite being a preset and even uneven as we move from note to note. So it's like, okay, I will go with that. So I wrote my melody with that and then moved some of that into here. So if we wanted to use this for an intro, we could. We're showing our melody here. But remember, my advice is no great big long intros for the moment. First songs, you want to get people into your vocal ASAP. And then this is the rhythm guitar line we're used to. So by the time we've established where we're sort of going with our melody, we now got our second half of the verse doing that, and I've moved the rest of this vocal line to our lead guitar. That goes into the verse as we know it, which goes into chorus as we know it. Then we've got our next verse. Now you'll notice that this verse both stays up but also comes down. We've kept a lot of the elements that we built up through our chorus. So our brass section. I've added these guys, the French horns. They're doing exactly the same as the brass, and I've also carried these guys along. The strings. So together they're all playing exactly the same thing, but nothing wrong with that. We built this nice block sound here, only that has melodic movement with the string. But here, we want to keep some of the fullness of the chorus, but we also want to back off, because remember, the vocal is definitely the most important thing here at this point. This is where we're telling the story. It's the, why do I love you, baby? Well, why do you not love me, baby? This verse is all about that explanation, and without that, our choruses don't work. At least not properly. They might be like, oh yeah, it's vaguely amusing, but they become irrelevant. The chorus is a punchline to a joke. If you haven't got the good preamble, if you mess up your preamble, your punchline's worthless. You'll see that I have dropped the guitars at this point. Oh, if you hadn't worked it out, this is going back to our verse chord progression. So of course our brass is following that, just copied. Move the octaves to make sure that it sits right. So like you'll see with the strings, that's our piano, that's our string. Strings commonly need to be an octave up to work. So you just move your instrument, whichever octave it needs to be, up, down, until it plays comfortably and plays the role you need it to do. For the moment, don't fuss on whether that is within the playable range of the instrument, unless it's one of those fancier sample libraries where after the point where the instrument wouldn't play, it stops playing. In which case, then you have to worry about it because your notes disappear and you end up with silence. But a lot of the simpler synth-based romplers will just carry it on. Easy. Don't worry about it. This is not about authenticity, it's about getting a result. So we've kept a lot of the energy of our chorus, but we've also allowed a certain amount of that to bleed away, so that when we get to the end of this, now notice the difference. Musically the same, but we've added this extra tone. The French horn may not stick out, but once you're used to what a French horn does inside a mix, it brings this huge amount of body in. And that's a brilliant thing, which is why you so commonly see and hear them in things, because French horns, flugelhorns, those sorts of horns will bring a great big body through. So structurally here it's exactly the same, we've just added another line. But look, these lines are not quite the same as each other. This is another thing that our French horns are doing. I took our string line, and as you see, they become a little different from each other. This rises, and then drops back to here. So the way that I created that was to take a section of the French horn, pop it up by an octave, because if it came in at the same point, there wasn't a sense of it doing anything different. We really needed to stand out more in the first half, because remember the second half we've got a whole brass section. So we've given it initially just an octave move, but then we start to change that and we end up with a little bit of harmonic interest. Just a little bit. We're not going to overdo it. Little bit of counter melody, not playing counter melody big here, but just a little bit, and that's nice. So here when the French horn's in, suddenly there's just so much body in everything, and that's exactly what it's for. No new material, just a new tone to fill things out. So the end of our second chorus. This is our verse again, but you'll notice there are some differences. We've got our guitars lines have been carried into our brass and string lines. So that is exactly the same. That's just our rhythm guitar line, and it's been handed to the brass. I've kept it so that remember, if you let brass play like that, it tends to sound horrible. So looking for an easy solution, just keep it more pulled back. All it's doing is adding a little bit more texture. Our French horns are just playing this. The more complex one is our string line, which is taking this electric guitar and just adding some extra little bits. So do-do-doop, and then we're carrying this back. Let me expand this so it's a bit easier to see, and that is, this is exactly the same as our electric guitar, do-do-doop, but the string is adding these little bits here. And if you see, it doesn't automatically put them here because it would be do-do-do-do-do. It would be very square. Workable, but very square. So we've now created a little bit of interest by saying, okay, we'll take that, but we'll use the end of the bar, which has not been used by the first guitar. The bass is using it, but we don't need to give it that space now. We need to have something new, but familiar. We could be adding a new instrument every single time, but that gets a little bit obvious. Let's work with what we've got. It's going to be a lot easier for mixing too if we don't have 27 instruments by the time we get to bar 27, because it's just a bit thoughtless. So, and then this one just holds. So the pattern is to come back down the arpeggio, hold, down the arpeggio, but you see that one goes to a slightly different spot. I can do that because the official note is here, but this is the third. First, third, fifth. So I've gone to here rather than here. Just provides a tiny bit of melodic interest. The brain won't consciously notice it, but it'll just go, ooh, excitement, free excitement. That's all this does, and just like the guitar, at the end, because at the end we're going into chorus. Now our chorus doesn't actually have to be, it was untidy. It offends me when it's untidy. Our chorus does not have to be that much different from what we had before. There are going to be differences, but musically we can let it drop back to, so it's exactly the same as our first chorus. Just copied and pasted that here, no difference. But at the end of this one, we're going into the second one. There's really only one difference here. Yes, we've got the same French horn line as we do in our second chorus. That bit's exactly the same, but you see our strings here are doubled. Where our strings here they still sit below the mix, they rise. But here, straight away they're really bright and forward. So all I've done again is I haven't written a single new note. I've just copied this, dragged it 2 octaves above. If you put it on just 1 octave above, it works, but not as well as when you put it 2 octaves above. So we're getting that angelic feel that we get from nice bright high strings. You can sometimes need to watch your mix when you do it, but find the point where it works and you are golden for free, because you didn't write a single new note. And that just copies that is our arrangement. We have a song now that's actually 4 minutes long, just over 4 minutes long. That's a long song in terms of pop music. 2 minutes will do the job, but it's given us 1, 2, 3, 4 verses and the chorus 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Brilliant. I might stop this here. The next one I will do vocals. So any questions, ask down below. If you want help doing stuff yourself, look down below, look at hiring me. Have a good day, and I look forward to seeing you on the next version of this.